The collapse never announces itself. It arrives quietly, like a shadow slipping under the door, until suddenly, everything you thought was solid begins to liquefy beneath your feet. One morning, the price of bread is different. A week later, your rent feels heavier. A month after that, your savings, your supposed safety net, has lost a slice of its meaning. At first, people blame the stores, then the suppliers, then the politicians. But beneath the noise and outrage lies a truth almost no one notices. The fuse was lit long before the flames touched your life. It starts with numbers on a screen, digits created in silence by an institution you never see, staffed by people you never voted for. A single decision, a shift of half a percentage point, a purchase of billions in bonds, a quiet injection of liquidity. To the public, nothing seems to happen. The sky doesn't split open, the earth doesn't shake. But inside the global financial machine, a new current begins flowing. Subtle at first, then unstoppable. Prices stretch, debts swell, wages hollow out, and life tightens around you, one invisible thread at a time. Look around during a period of inflationary surge. The fluorescent supermarkets with half-empty shelves, the gas stations where digits blink upward faster than you can comprehend, the silent anxiety in the faces of parents calculating their week on the back of a receipt. There is a collective sense of drowning in slow motion. And yet, the institutions responsible never appear. Instead, we are told that supply chains are stressed, that markets are adjusting, that temporary pressures will fade. Words designed to pacify, to distract, to make you believe the wound came from nowhere. But nothing about this collapse is spontaneous. Every financial storm is a consequence of earlier storms, each one engineered, prolonged, or accelerated by decisions made inside marble buildings with closed doors and no windows to the public. For decades, central banks have expanded their reach, turning themselves from guardians of stability into architects of economic weather. They raise interest rates and economies freeze. They lower them and markets overheat. They create money at a scale that once would have been considered science fiction, unleashing tidal waves of liquidity that distort everything they touch: housing, wages, savings, entire nations. And the most chilling part? You feel the consequences long before you realize the cause. When your rent rises faster than your income, when your bank account grows but buys less, when the dream of owning a home mutates into a mathematical impossibility, those are not failures of the market. They are aftershocks of policies written in vocabulary so arcane it may as well be scripture. The decisions appear technical, bloodless, harmless. But behind every sterile phrase, balance sheet expansion, monetary accommodation, forward guidance, is a mechanism that extracts power from millions and concentrates it into the hands of a few. This is the collapse you never voted for. Generations are being reshaped by choices made without their consent. The erosion of middle-class stability, the inflation of asset bubbles that trap young families outside the gates of ownership, the slow cannibalization of savings that forces the elderly back into the workforce. Lives bend around policies no one explains and no one can challenge. We are all tenants in a financial system whose landlord remains faceless. And yet, the narrative persists. This is just how the economy works. But economies don't simply work. They are designed. They are manipulated. They are tuned like instruments, sometimes to soothe, sometimes to tighten, sometimes to break. And the strings that now choke households across the world trace back to a single source: a small circle of institutions that control the lifeblood of modern civilization: money itself. As the imbalance grows, as the pressure mounts, people feel the collapse long before they understand it. The tragedy isn't that the system is failing. The tragedy is that it's functioning exactly as intended. History does not repeat itself word for word. but it rhymes with a violence that should terrify anyone paying attention. Every empire begins with ambition, expands with discipline, and dies the moment it loses control of its own money. That is the pattern carved into centuries of collapse, a formula so consistent it feels less like history and more like fate. And today, we are tracing the same lines. Take Rome. For centuries, the denarius was a symbol of strength, pure silver, pure trust. But wars grew expensive, and emperors discovered a tempting shortcut: dilute the coinage, trim the silver, stretch the money supply. At first, no one noticed. Then, prices crept upward. Wages stagnated. Citizens grew restless. By the end, the once mighty denarius was little more than a metallic lie, and Rome was drowning in inflation so severe it hollowed out its economy from within. The empire didn't fall in a single dramatic moment. It rotted slowly through financial decay. Fast forward 1,000 years, and the same story unfolds in the British Empire. Its global dominance was tied to the strength of the pound, but wars again demanded more than taxpayers could bear. The solution? Print, borrow, inflate. By the mid-20th century, the pound had lost nearly all its original value. An empire that once controlled the seas now struggled to control its own currency. The sun didn't set on Britain because its armies grew weak. It set because its money did. Then came 1971, America's turning point. When the dollar was severed from gold, it liberated governments and central banks from the final restraint on money creation. What followed was predictable: inflation cycles, asset bubbles, wage stagnation, and the birth of a financial system propped up not by production, but by ever-expanding debt. It was the Roman script rewritten in the language of modern finance. Across every century, the pattern remains the same. Step 1. A powerful nation accumulates wealth and confidence. Step 2. It expands beyond its means. Step 3. It manipulates its currency to buy more time. Step 4. Inflation erodes trust. Step 5. The public shoulders the cost while elites preserve their assets. Step 6. Collapse arrives, quietly at first, then all at once. This is not ideology. It is arithmetic. Empires fall for many reasons: corruption, war, inequality. But the root cause hiding beneath them all is monetary decay. When a society loses the value of its money, it loses the value of its promises. Savings become illusions. Contracts weaken. Institutions distort their purpose. The economy shifts from producing wealth to surviving instability. People stop planning for the future because the future becomes unknowable. And behind each fall, there is always a central authority convinced it can outsmart economic gravity. Roman emperors thought they could debase without consequence. British policymakers believed they could borrow indefinitely. American officials promised that fiat currency would remain strong forever. Every leader believed the same lie. This time is different. But history answers the same way every time. No, it isn't. The collapse of money is never sudden. It is a slow-motion unraveling that accelerates only when it becomes impossible to hide. At first, prices rise gently, explained away by temporary excuses. Then, wages lag. Then, debts surge. Then, political divisions widen as people search for someone to blame. By the time the system cracks, the decisions that doomed it were made decades earlier. This is the pattern, the heartbeat of every empire's rise and fall. And as we trace its shape across time, an uncomfortable truth emerges. Our world today is not breaking the cycle. It's repeating it with mathematical precision. The only question left is not if the pattern continues. It's whether anyone recognizes it before the next collapse begins. If history is a warning, then the present is an echo. The pattern carved into empires long gone is now unfolding in real time, around us, beneath us, within the very structure of modern life. The numbers may be different, the technology more advanced, the institutions more polished, but the mechanics are identical. We are living inside the same cycle, only this time, it's global, synchronized, and dangerously fragile. Look at the world today. Household debt at record highs. National debt curves bending upward like a stress fracture. Assets inflated beyond reason. Wages lagging behind every measurable cost of living. These are not random symptoms. They are signatures. The same signatures that appeared in Rome before the debasement crisis, in Britain before the pound unraveled, in the United States before the 1970s inflation storm. The timeline shifts, but the narrative doesn't. Modern central banks insist they have engineered a new era, an age where recessions can be prevented, downturns softened, markets guided with precision. But the tools they depend on are the same mechanisms that doomed every empire before. Excessive money creation, artificial interest rates, and debt expansion masquerading as prosperity. Only now, the scale has metastasized. What once took centuries takes decades. What once harmed empires now destabilizes entire continents. Consider the last 15 years. In response to crisis, central banks around the world unleashed a tidal wave of money. Quantitative easing, trillion-dollar asset purchases, near-zero interest rates. At first, it felt like salvation. Markets surged. Asset owners became wealthier. Governments borrowed without restraint. But beneath the celebration, a shadow grew. Inflation locked inside financial markets, waiting for the perfect trigger. The trigger came, and when it did, prices exploded, currencies weakened, and the very middle class that had been told everything was under control found itself squeezed from every direction. Food, housing, healthcare, energy, each cost rising like a tide that refuses to retreat. We are told this is temporary, but history teaches otherwise. Inflation is never temporary when the cause is structural, and ours is. The parallels stretch further. Housing today mirrors the prelude to every historical breakdown. Prices detached from incomes, ownership drifting out of reach, entire generations priced out of stability. It happened in Rome as land concentrated into the hands of the wealthy. It happened in Britain as wartime borrowing eroded affordability. And it's happening now as central bank engineered asset bubbles turn shelter into a luxury. Even the social fractures feel familiar. When money breaks, society follows. Distrust rises. Politics polarize. People sense the system bending, but can't identify why. In the past, emperors, monarchs, and governments blamed outsiders, minorities, or foreign rivals. Today, the blame scatters across corporations, immigrants, politicians, everyone except the one institution orchestrating the financial architecture beneath it all. The most unsettling parallel isn't what we can see, it's what we can't. Modern central banks have added a new layer to the cycle: algorithms, automated liquidity engines, and digital balance sheets updated at the speed of light. These tools allow them not only to manipulate the economy, but to extend cycles beyond their natural limits. A recession delayed becomes a recession amplified. A bubble prolonged becomes a bubble weaponized. Every artificial correction plants the seed for a greater distortion. We are living inside a system that looks stable only because it is constantly being held up by invisible hands. And just like every empire before, we mistake the temporary balance for genuine control. We treat rising markets as success, low interest rates as compassion, easy credit as progress. But these are not signs of strength. They are signs of addiction, an economy dependent on intervention, unable to stand on its own, marching toward the same end written in every chapter of monetary history. The past is not behind us. it is beneath us, and the ground is starting to move. For most of your life, you were told that central banks are guardians, neutral referees standing above politics, working quietly to stabilize the economy. But step behind the curtain, and the story warps into something far more unsettling. These institutions are not passive observers. They are the architects of the system itself, shaping markets, shaping incentives, shaping behavior, shaping you, with a precision that governments could only dream of. This is the revelation. Modern central banks are the most powerful, unelected institutions on Earth. They do not command armies, yet they can freeze an economy with a single announcement. They do not write laws, yet they determine which generations thrive and which struggle. They do not appear on ballots, yet their decisions decide the fate of nations. Their power is not loud. It is quiet, procedural, wrapped in technical jargon designed to create distance between their actions and your understanding of them. Words like liquidity injections and policy accommodation sound harmless, even benevolent. But behind each phrase lies an instrument of control, one that reaches from financial markets into the lives of ordinary people who never had a voice in the process. Consider interest rates. With a stroke of policy, central banks can make borrowing cheap or suffocating. They can inflate asset prices, rewarding those who already own wealth, or they can choke off investment, triggering layoffs and recession. These choices alter the trajectory of millions of lives, but they are made by committees that operate behind closed doors, reveal only what they choose to reveal, and face no consequences for failure. Then there is quantitative easing, the polite term for creating money out of thin air and funneling it into financial markets. Presented as a rescue measure, it became something else entirely. A mechanism that enriched asset holders while leaving workers behind. It inflated the price of stocks, real estate, and corporate valuations, creating the illusion of prosperity while quietly transferring wealth upward. The public saw markets booming and believed the economy was strong. In reality, a small elite was being lifted while the foundation beneath everyone else eroded. But the most revealing mechanism of all is the repo market, the emergency backdoor through which central banks pump short-term liquidity into banks and hedge funds when the system buckles under its own weight. It is the red panic button of the financial world, pressed when risks taken by the powerful threaten to spill onto the public. These interventions are rarely discussed, rarely understood, and never voted on. Yet every time the button is pressed, moral hazard spreads. The elite take the risks, the public bears the fallout. And now, a new frontier emerges. Digital money, controlled directly by the central bank. Central bank digital currencies, the next evolution of monetary authority. They are sold as convenience, efficiency, modernization. But beneath the branding lies the most refined tool of behavioral control in human history. Programmable money, trackable transactions, the ability to approve, deny, restrict, or expire funds. A financial system with no cash, no anonymity, no escape. For the first time, the architects of money are becoming the architects of movement, identity, and choice. This is not theory, it is trajectory. The same institutions that manage inflation, suppress rates, and inflate liquidity now seek the ability to oversee every transaction you make, every dollar tied to a digital leash, every financial decision visible, traceable, influenceable. And yet, the public remains calm, not because the truth is hidden, but because it is buried beneath complexity. The system survives not through transparency, but through opacity. Central banks do not need to silence dissent. They simply speak a language the public cannot decode. But once the veil is lifted, the revelation becomes impossible to ignore. They don't just manage the economy, they manage the boundaries of freedom within it. Every cycle has its end, not because collapse is dramatic or cinematic, but because systems stretched beyond their limits eventually snap. We are standing at that threshold now, caught between a financial architecture that can no longer sustain itself and a future being engineered to absorb the consequences. The inevitability isn't the fall, it's the transition. And inside that transition lies both the trap and the last sliver of choice we still possess. The truth is simple and merciless. The system cannot continue as it is. Debt has outgrown productivity. Money has lost its anchor. Inflation has become a structural parasite, feeding on households while governments scramble to disguise the damage. Central banks are trapped in a paradox of their own making, forced to keep printing to prevent collapse, yet punished every time the printing accelerates the decay. They can slow the deterioration, distort it, redirect it, but they cannot stop it. The math refuses to bend for anyone. And so, instead of reversing course, new infrastructure is being prepared. One designed not to save the old system, but to control its fallout. Central bank digital currencies, framed as innovation, are quietly emerging as the next stage of financial governance. Digital money that can be monitored in real time, restricted by algorithm, distributed by policy, or switched off with the ease of a software update. A currency not just spent, but overseen. Imagine a world where stimulus can be targeted to specific behaviors, where savings can be penalized if not spent fast enough, where certain purchases are flagged or blocked for stability. This is not hypothetical. It is the logical endpoint of a system desperate to maintain order when traditional tools have lost their strength. And yet, within the tightening circle, there is still a path forward, a narrow, uncomfortable one that demands awareness rather than obedience. Because while central banks can shape the environment, they cannot fully control how individuals adapt to it. They cannot stop people from learning the rules of the game. They cannot prevent the rise of parallel systems, hard assets, decentralized technologies, alternative stores of value. Gold, land, scarce commodities, and censorship-resistant digital currencies form the beginnings of a counter-architecture, one built on independence rather than trust in institutions. But empowerment begins with clarity. The most dangerous illusion is believing that the collapse, when it arrives, will be sudden. It won't. It will feel like a continuation of trends already familiar. Higher prices, restricted credit, more surveillance, more narratives explaining why each new measure is for your safety. The trap is not the fall itself. The trap is acclimating to it. And that is why understanding the system is not optional anymore. It is the only defense left. When you understand how money is manipulated, you stop being manipulated by it. When you recognize the pattern, you stop mistaking crisis for coincidence. When you see who benefits from instability, you stop accepting instability as fate. The inevitability is not the collapse of an economy. It is the reshaping of freedom inside that economy. But inevitability is not destiny. Not yet. Because in every collapsing empire, there were always individuals who perceived the shift early. Those who read the signals, saw through the illusion, and positioned themselves not just to survive, but to escape the gravitational pull of the failing system. The future belongs to them, to the ones who refuse to sleepwalk into the next era of engineered control, to the ones who choose awareness over comfort. We cannot stop the cycle, but we can step outside it. And once you do, the truth becomes unforgettably clear. You were never powerless, only uninformed.